Hey church family, I hope you're doing well. I just wanted to take a few moments this week in this latest update to explore the subject of how you and I and us together as a church family can express love whilst living in an online world. Jesus in John 13 verse 35 said, "By this all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another." So love is a clearly defining characteristic of how we show the world around us that we belong to Jesus. But the question that I want us to try and explore is, how can we do that in an online world? You see, I want to suggest to you that the online world that we are immersed in at the moment has some particular challenges to you and I expressing love for one another. The first challenge is this: the online world is becoming increasingly a shouty and a brutish culture. People are willing to say things online and add them to comments that they would never say in person to the individual. If you've not experienced this, all you need to do is go on Twitter and have a look at some of the comments below some high-profile people, and you'll see how brutish and shouty our culture is becoming. Secondly, I want to suggest to you that the online world, even in places like Skype and Zoom, we're missing lots of the normal signals that you and I rely upon for understanding one another. We miss much of the body language. We miss much of the eye contact. And all of this sets us up for misunderstanding one another more and more. We just need to be aware of that. The online world is a world where we can misunderstand one another easily. And finally, in Romans 16, verse 16, the Apostle Paul, finishing his letter to the church in Romans, he says, "Greet one another with a holy kiss." Now, for our kind of 21st century ears, that sounds a very strange thing, but what the Apostle Paul is doing is he's showing that the body of Christ is meant to be a relational place. The body of Christ is meant to be a place where when somebody's grieving, we place a hand upon their shoulder. When somebody is in need of prayer, we lay hands upon them. That when you see somebody coming through the door on a Sunday at the King Centre, you give them a hug. That the family of God is meant to be like that. And we're living in days when we are deliberately, for the sake of restricting the flow of coronavirus, stopping those type of activities. And so the kind of fabric of relationship within the church is just different. And so I want to suggest to you that we are living in days when we're going to have to be more deliberate about how we express love for one another. So how can you and I express love for one another in the body of Christ at this time when we're living pretty much most of the time online? I want to give you three things that I think will really help us in this season. Firstly, believe the best in one another. Believe the best in one another. With all of those things that kind of hinder online relationships, I want to suggest to you that we need to work even harder at believing the best in one another. Any relationship that starts from a position of suspicion or kind of questioning what's being said is doomed to failure. When Lorna and I sit down with couples who are maybe having a few relational tensions, one of the things that we want to encourage them is to believe the best. Because if you believe the best in one another, it creates a healthy context where love and trust and a relationship can blossom. If you don't believe the best in one another, none of that is possible. And so in these days where maybe we misunderstand one another, where we don't fully pick up the picture because we're having to do it online, I want to encourage you to believe the best in one another. Secondly, I want to encourage you to be patient. One of the fruits of the Spirit is patience. And I want to suggest to you one of the languages of love is patience. When we're patient with one another, we give one another the absolute maximum opportunity to express what we're saying, to communicate well, to even get things wrong, and then to retrace our steps and to be able to speak into them so that we can understand one another. If we're not patient and we just jump on the first thing, we're going to end up causing relational tension rather than allowing love for one another to grow. Just as an example of what patience looks like, I was watching Dan's video last Friday about the new discipleship setup, and I was thinking, when did we first have the very first conversation about that? And it was about a year and a half ago. And as a pastoral team, we'd been praying about this and talking about this. And then we extended that into a wider group of people, our discipleship group leaders and other people who have kind of significant leadership responsibility in the church. That was a year and a half of thinking and praying and discussing together. Patience is really needed in this time. And so I want to encourage you, will you be patient with one another? Will you be patient with your discipleship group leaders? Will you be patient with some of the processes that we're trying to put in place? They're not always going to go well the first time we do it. We're aware that sometimes the technology kind of falls over. Will you be patient? Because in an environment of patience, love can flourish. And the final thing I want to say is love is not primarily a feeling. Love primarily is an action. We express love. We demonstrate love. And so I want to encourage you at this time to be doubly looking for opportunities to express love to one another. Love one another by picking up the phone and having a chat with one another. Love one another by meeting people, obviously with social distancing in place, at the beach and go for a walk with one another. Love one another by writing cards to one another. There are just a whole host of ways in this particular unusual season that you can express and actively model love for one another. So I want to encourage you over these days when we're living in this online world, would you believe the best in one another? Would you be patient with one another? And would you actively look for ways to express love to one another? Friends, we have a great opportunity in these days to show the world in a shouty, brutish culture what love really looks like. And by that we belong to Jesus. Shall we do it together, friends?